You'll let me know when to begin, Alfred, right?
Yes, in three, just give us 1 second.
Okay. Welcome, welcome everyone. I'm Sharon Pratt. I'm the founding director of the Institute of Politics, Policy, and History, housed on the campus of the University of the District of Columbia. We're all operating in the world of the Ethernet because of the pandemic, but we are still functioning, and particularly thrilled and delighted to have this gathering tonight. You know, a significant part of the mission of the Institute of Politics, Policy, and History that we call IPPH is to rediscover the history of Washington, D.C. And to help us do that, we have really distinguished individuals who serve as resident fellows to help us explore facets of Washington life. And one such
Sister Joy is doing something. Oh. She sent me the link.
So we're going to put everybody on mute except the person who's speaking at the time. Otherwise, we'll be competing for that in that conversation. But at any rate, what we're focused on tonight is the written word. And our resident fellow for the written word is Ethelbert Miller, who's done a brilliant job. He's really enriched our conversation, helped to inform not only the community of IPPH, but the University of the District of Columbia community and communities beyond. And tonight, what we are doing is celebrating the second poet laureate of Washington, D.C. She followed an iconic figure, and that was Sterling Brown. And I shouldn't own up to it, but I'm old enough to remember he was up there in age, but by the time I arrived at Howard's campus, but he was quite a personality, Sterling Brown. And the person who followed in his footsteps, but her own personality made her own impact, is Dolores Kendrick, and who was not only a celebrated and respected poet, but also someone who wasn't just preoccupied with her own work. She was someone who helped to encourage and nurture the work and talents of others. And I think a combination of that is why Washington, D.C. wanted to respect her, celebrate her as our second poet laureate. But, you know, as typical of people who are either lawyers or politicians, we only have a superficial knowledge of things. So we just know enough to talk. I'm going to turn it over to somebody who really understands the subject matter of tonight, the individual we celebrate tonight, and someone who's brought so much honor and distinction to IPPH, and that's Ethelbert Miller.
Thank you, Mayor Pratt. The times we live in perhaps require that poets gather, that they come together to remind us of the importance of words, meaning, and memory. When poets gather, their presence provides light and direction. We bring together 4 poets this evening to remember the life and work of Dolores Kendrick. We ask them to lift their voices and sing. We ask this choir of poets to remember, to testify, and to honor a woman who once walked among us possessing amazing grace and dignity. Dolores Kendrick elevated words into poems. She elevated people into potential. She was a teacher, a person who didn't tolerate imperfection, but knew and understood the beauty inside each individual. She could pull that beauty out, teach one how to hold and polish it, make it glitter the way poetry glitters when it pursues the miraculous. When poets gather during a descending darkness, what keeps us warm, filled with hope, and makes us believers is the poetry of Margaret Walker, Gwendolyn Brooks, Lucille Clifton, June Jordan, Mae Miller, Naomi Long Magic, and Dolores Kendrick. These women are our mothers and sisters who gave birth to brightness. But it is Dolores Kendrick who reminds us not that the rainbow is enough, but that the rainbow is on fire. Dolores Kendrick was the second poet laureate of Washington, D.C. She was appointed in 1999 by Mayor Anthony Williams. Kendrick follows Sterling A. Brown, who was poet laureate from 1984 to 1989. A graduate of Miners Teachers College in 1949, she taught in the D.C. public school system and founded the School Without Walls in 1965. For 20 years, she excelled as a teacher at Phillips Exeter Academy in New Hampshire. There, she designed the school's first course on poetry. If you ever have the opportunity to visit Exeter, you will find an oil portrait of Dolores Kendrick in the main hall used for assembly. It predates The Crown on Netflix. The painting captures Dolores in her royal splendor. Dolores was a poet who knew how to pose. She was a Fulbright scholar to Northern Ireland. Dolores Kendrick has published 5 books of poetry. Her most well-known work was The Women of Plums, poems in the voices of slave women. And 2 of those poems can be found in a new anthology of African-American poetry, 250 Years of Struggle and Song, edited by Kevin Young. Honoring Dolores Kendrick this evening are poets Abdul Ali, A. Van Jordan, Remica Bingham-Risher, and the poet Sistah Joy. Abdul Ali is a poet, writer, educator, and cultural worker. He's a program coordinator at the Community College of Baltimore County. He has taught at Johns Hopkins University and Howard University. His book, Trouble Sleeping, won the 2014 New Issues Poetry Book Prize. A. Van Jordan is the author of 4 collections of poems. His book, Magnolia, was listed as one of the best books of 2005 by the London Times. His book, Rise, won the Penn Oakland Josephine Miles Award. A. Van Jordan has been the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship and a Landon Literary Award in poetry. Remica Bingham-Risher is the author of Conversion, winner of the Naomi Long Magic Poetry Award. Her book, What We Ask of Flesh, was a finalist for a Library of Virginia Book Award. She is currently the Director of Quality Enhancement Plan Initiatives at Old Dominion University. Poet Sistah Joy, Matthew Alford, was appointed as the inaugural Poet Laureate of Prince George's County, Maryland in September 2018. She's an author, arts advocate, and is the host of the cable television show, Sojourn with Words. Sistah Joy is the author of Lord, I'm Dancing as Fast as I Can in This Garden Called Life. Abdul Ali will begin our program and will be followed by A. Van Jordan, Remica Bingham-Risher, and Sistah Joy. Abdul Ali.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Ethelbert. I continue to be in awe of all that you do for poetry. And I know Dolores Kendrick loved you very much for all that you did for her career. Dolores Kendrick was our second poet laureate. She was an elder. She was stylish, wearing raccoon furs, gowns, and heels to poetry readings. She suffered no fools. She had a wry sense of humor. She was a friend. She was proud. She was a giant that counted Sterling Brown as her father's tennis partner, Gwendolyn Brooks as her mentor, and Robert Hayden and James Baldwin as her BFFs. It was in many ways a rare gift to belong to her Poets in Progress program. But more than the official connection, I will forever remember the lunches at Eatonville, at the Mandarin Hotel, after her poetry readings and the near midnight phone calls where she wanted to talk poetry. She claimed that she stayed up vampire hours. So I was, she caused my trouble sleeping, my troubled sleep. But, as a reader and as someone interested in criticism and honoring our literary ancestors, I must say that a close study of Miss Kendrick's career reveals a half century of publishing poems and plays, travel, being closely engaged in a vibrant, albeit interior, life of letters, a 40-plus year career as a high school teacher, half of which was spent as a DC public school teacher, and the other 20 plus at Philip Exeter Academy in New Hampshire. In the 1950s, Miss Kendrick was a member of the literary journal Dazine. I always mispronounce it. She was published in its first issue and later became an editor, making her one of the Howard poets, probably one of the only female members. I'm interested in this period. I'm interested in her contribution to this artifact that we don't hear enough about. I'm interested in how poets like Kendrick often get eclipsed by the Black arts movement. I'm interested in a number of things that I hope to touch on. My first encounter with Dolores Kendrick was as a student at Howard University. In my sophomore seminar course, we read novels, plays, and we also read a collection of poems, Women of Plums. I believe that spring there was a Hearts Day program where we were honoring, as a department, legendary African-American poets. I believe it was Nikki Giovanni, Lucille Clifton, and Mari Evans. And Dolores Kendrick was invited to say a few words about Nikki Giovanni. What was interesting is that she never talked about Nikki Giovanni. She talked about herself. And I will never forget that. And I thought about how maybe in her, diva-esque way, she wanted us to know that she was also here, and let us not forget. It was also in that moment that I realized how a lot of our literary elders do not feel appreciated. And that point was never lost on me. And, I plan to commit my life to making sure that I'm writing and trying to do what I can to remember our literary ancestors. I would like to posit that Miss Kendrick's signature poem is a poem titled Rooms. And forgive me if someone else wanted to talk about it, but I just wanted to close with reading as much as I can about the poem and just ending on that note, because I feel like that poem encapsulates her migration out of DC, the alienation that she felt surrounded by whiteness, her fierce spirit, and all of these wonderful things that she gives us in this gorgeous poem that to me seems inspired by Wallace Stevens' 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. Rooms. 1. I don't know where it was. It was near, where all the rooms were clothed in ice and naked children walked beside me and asked for candy. That's not nourishment, I said. 2. It was near. Their white bodies were hot with fevers. I took their temperatures and wondered if white flesh held heat longer than black. They wondered at my curiosity. 3. I walk into the classroom with Baldwin, Brooks, Wright, and Hayden, their mastery of the universe, the strut of their language, soft in my footprints. I am filled. 4. And when I walk into the classroom, I close the closet door at the end of the room, look at the straight white teeth in the white mouths of the white faces before me, and pick up Shakespeare. 5. Because I am different, I am strangely cultured. I know the land that seeds the straight white teeth, where bloom the rooms of white mouths. I discovered it long before Columbus. I carried it in my loins while the rivers of Africa swept through my blood. I ate it when I was hungry, spat it out when it sickened me. My children sucked its swollen bosom. When the land was dry, I caught its dust and made fragile dreams when Shakespeare was but a thought. I pick up Shakespeare. His body cracks. The room grows larger. 6. So fine, this Black child standing cold in the light of the old schoolroom, public. 7. He is shivering, so am I. One day I will leave him abruptly, and I do not believe in violence, while he screams quietly in a corner, watching my blackboard, magic, noticing the dust on my heels. 8. There's not enough room for us both. We both have to grow. We both need visions. We both owe debts. Yours a penny, mine a profession. Pay up. 9. Those rooms were wild and funny, but I left them because they starved me. They were close and muggy and wet, but I left them because they drained me. They were narrow and dim and soft, but I left them because they crushed me. They were raw, infected, diseased, but I left them because there was a stench from the children's decaying spirits. And in the doorway, blocking my departure, stood 3 shapes with white teeth, even and straight, no braces, whispering to me, Shakespeare, Shakespeare. 10. Well, I have arrived. 11. English class, 9 a.m., private. The sun is clear. The glass glistens. In the quad, the sky bothers to cloud, making quick shadows for the willow, the birch, and the elm. The skin of the bright room itches. It always seems to need lotions, creams, salves, balms. It is very delicate. I wonder if power is delicate ever, if those who live in fragile rooms become the bones of such rooms, if all the broken limbs that hobble through the marble halls are diplomas of unpitiable pride. The stench again. 12. I too have a power struck from the lineage of my visions that crowd upon me more demandingly than the dead who walk me now. Their ghosts are in their children, the white mouths, the little questions, but these faces are icons. They are gilden. They are sweet and bloom in special rooms in the right temperature and light while my visions knock at the door. 13. Exeunt ghost. Shakespeare should know better. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdul Ali. And now we'll hear from Avan Jordan.
Thank you. Thank you, Elphaba. And just very great to be here with old friends and new friends. Great to be here with my former mayor as well. And just great to be here tonight to honor Dolores Kendrick, who was just, I can't even, I have something written here, I'll read it, but I can't even tell you how much I miss her today. So I'm gonna open by just reading the little blurb I wrote that I had the honor to write for Dolores Kendrick's last book, Rainbow on Fire. I can't think of another American poet with the range of both lyric intensity and narrative drive as DC Poet Laureate Dolores Kendrick. Looking over the oeuvre of her career, it's clear that she has quietly mastered the dramatic monologue and mined it for all its wealth. From The Women of Plums, Poems in the Voices of Slave Women, to Why the Woman is Singing on the Corner, a verse narrative, one hears the oral history of America through the voices of women of color. I can't think of a more timely moment than now to raise these voices once again. Small wonder that her poems have lent themselves to being rendered on stage, including the Kennedy Center. Kendrick's voice has held a quiet power for decades that has consistently been in conversation with more strident voices. You'll hear the wisdom of Maya Angelou, the philosophy of Lucille Clifton, and the beauty of the quotidian of Sterling Brown, as in the voices we hear on the corner waiting on the bus, the private conversations we hold around a dinner table, and the rage we must conjure in defense of one's voice. That's all of this, that all of this has come from one poet is a wonder. Beyond that, to think that this poet is still conjuring these voices and these moments is a gift to us all. And this collected work, it's clear why she's the only poet to hold the post of DC Poet Laureate other than Sterling Brown at that time. Who else could that torch have been passed on to? As the title of one of her collections urges, now is the thing to praise, and that thing is Dolores Kendrick. I met Dolores Kendrick on February 14th, 2002 at Yale University's Langston Hughes Conference, honoring his legacy. We were both invited by Elizabeth Alexander and Ms. Kendrick, and Ms. Kendrick and I were seated next to each other during the welcoming event. Oh, somebody's got their mic open. Oh, thank you. Okay. During the welcoming event, although I knew her name and had read a few of her poems, I didn't really know her. I didn't even know what Dolores Kendrick looked like. At some point, we greeted each other and we started talking about the night. Both of us hoping it wouldn't wear on too long. We had that thing in common where we didn't like long ceremonies and things. And we started talking about the people there and talking about them we were, and the music that was playing as we all settled in. And finally, she asked me, "Who are you?" Pulling out the program with her glasses down on her nose, looking at the program, not at me. And I told her my name, and she said, still looking down, "Oh, there you are," as if I had just appeared before her eyes. So I asked her her name, and when she told me, I said, "Oh, you're from DC. I used to live there." And she got this girlish smile on her face and said, "How did you know I was from DC?" And I told her that she was famous, which cracked her up. Dolores Kendrick taught me what it meant to make fast friends, or what love at first sight was all about, or anything that would explain what it felt like to meet someone that you had known your whole life, but somehow had just found. We stayed friends over the years right up to her death, and we would have long conversations on the phone. And yeah, Abdul, late at night often, so, and I'm not a night owl, but she would always catch me at like 10 o'clock and we end up talking for an hour or two. Which is something I don't usually like to do. But if I saw her name on the phone, I always answered no matter where I was. If I ever couldn't answer and it went 24 hours before calling her back, she would answer the phone and I'd say, "Hi, this is Van." And there would be a beat. And then she would say, "Oh my God, Van, where have you been?" And which always cracked me up. And in fact, when I told my wife I was doing this panel tonight, I was telling her that it was for Dolores Kendrick, and she said, "Oh yeah, that's that woman you would talk to all the time." And I reminded her, yeah, the 90-year-old woman I would talk to, that's her baby. Dolores Kendrick was a huge influence over the years, and not simply as a poet, but she also had an influence over how I thought of a career as a writer and how I envisioned the life of a poet. She was probably the oldest living writer that I was in constant contact with. And through her, I thought about the life of service that she embodied as a writer, something I also see in my friend and mentor and felt with E. Alfred Miller. A life of service not only to other poets, but also to people who normally wouldn't be drawn to poetry. And why wouldn't they be drawn to her work? She wrote about many of those people, which I'll say more about in a few minutes. She was someone who was encouraging to me when I wrote my second book, which used a lot of dramatic monologues and personas. Seeing the work she did in her collections gave me courage to do the work I did in my own. No one was better at the dramatic monologue, and she really needs more credit for the voices she brought to life on the page. The Women of Plums, Poems in the Voices of Slave Women is a book that felt ahead of its time, even with such an old subject matter. Part of Dolores Kendrick's voice is the voice of the women she wrote about. And I know I can't do her work service, although Abdul did a beautiful job of reading her work. So I'm going to try to bring her voice into this virtual room and close by playing a clip of hers, if I can. Can you all see this? Just give me a thumbs up if you can. Awesome. All right. This is Hattie on the Block.
Remember me? When you're nailed to a tree after the twilight dies. Kerry, you be still now. Don't make no noise. Mama will protect you from all the shouting and screaming and bidding that's going on right now. Hold on to Mama. Won't be long now. They done had their lunch and something will happen to take the fear out of your bones and sweat off in your eyes and eyelids and drape them to the sweet winds for the birds to eat. Something will happen. Happens that I be a slave woman. Maybe that makes me property, not a human being like all you who come to buy me. See if I'm sturdy, can hold ground, can withstand the elements, bear fruit when the seed is in.
Can you all hear her okay? Okay, good.
When the Lord's land, sing for my supper. When the seasons come, give death the mortgage on my bones. Don't come near me. Stay away. I'm not viable yet. I'm a bit unleavened. Still, Kerry, be still, Kerry. Child, don't cry. Don't let them see you cry, honey. There's a victory in that. Keep the tears in without they say. Hold on to my apron. Tear it if you want. Hold hard while we crush the evil, pushing its way through that crowd of shoppers, yelling before us and standing there, mocking us like with money and all the changes, mocking us with money and all the changes in the temple. But they all look good, don't they? Nice coats and trousers, bright shoes, sturdy hats. Ever seen a finer looking people than that? Evil be pretty sometimes, don't it? Money look good, even if it be for your soul. Souls can't be bought. I won't be of much use to anybody who buys me without my Kerry here. I'd be crippled, needing crutches. Who's gonna pay for them? Or will I have to work the fields, limping about with my mind catching butterflies when I should be picking cotton? Cause my soul be amputated when you bought me without my Kerry for a few dollars cheaper. No, don't. I beg you, don't touch me. Stay back. I can't leave this block in Holocaust. That's it, Harry. Hang tight. My, your forehead be hot. Fever coming on, I expect, and your mother's fever gone cold, making it more dangerous when it be exposed to the elements that gather up around her now. This early, bright morning, spoiled and festering in the mouths of all those happy buys who need the disease of your mama's wrath so they can recover from their own dying. Dying today if I be sold without my Kerry, I promise you that. Look on us before you lay your money down. What we cost? $2,500, good price. Buy what you breed. Masters, owners, buyers, fathers, sons, take vengeance on your dollar. God help me, I be his maid servant. I be his witness to this sale of woman flesh in the 28th year of my delivery. Kerry, look, wipe your eyes, child. See, they finished the bidding. Money be paid, we's together. God heard my halting words through the ears of these deafened people. You and me from this strange pulpit. Look lively, child. We be sold, but we ain't bought.
We be sold, but we ain't bought. Thank you all.
Thank you, Van. Thank you very much. Remica.
Hey, y'all. Thank you so much. Oh, man. So I've been writing these essays about the elders. So I'll just kind of read a piece of this for Dolores Kendrick. In the last few weeks, I've been coming back to a few things, one being color, the other, the elders. I was so eager to watch HBO's documentary, Black Art in the Absence of Light. It's about Black visual artists whose work has been underseen and in most cases undervalued. And once I sit with it, I start dreaming about Kerry James Marshall's talk of the shades of Black. I'm kind of going down the rabbit hole of research as poets are wont to do. And I find that true Black, the world's blackest paint shade, has gotten even darker over time. The newest Black is a pigment that promises to be a black hole in a bottle. When applied to a three-dimensional object, it makes the item look like a gap has suddenly been cut into the earth. Well, Kerry James Marshall is obsessed with the shades of Black because all of his figures are night dark, but have different undertones. I'm gonna share a quick Kerry James Marshall painting with you called Pastimes, so you can see, I hope you can see that. Good. So you can see that all of his figures, even though they're different, even though they're living, here very lavish lives, they're painted this really dark shade. And sometimes the darkness varies. He adds yellow or red or ochre, but never white. It's a conscious choice to the black that he puts in these photos. Let's go on. So as I'm thinking about Kerry James Marshall and those undertones, he says in the documentary, the idea is that Blackness is non-negotiable in those pictures. It's unequivocal. That's the thing that he means for people to identify immediately. They are Black to demonstrate that Blackness can have complexity, depth, richness. Well, this idea of Blackness for the artist being non-negotiable, being complex and rich, that brought me back to the work of Dolores Kendrick. I never had the privilege of meeting DC's second poet laureate. We've been in some rooms together, but I was never able to actually sit at her feet. But her work in living has taught me much about finding our way to true Black, not the paint shade, but the Black artist holding up Blackness in earnest, moving us toward light. Van just mentioned her first book, Now is the Thing to Praise. It's a full-length collection that came out of Lotus Press, and Naomi Long Madgett, who Ethelbert mentioned. And what really stuck out to me in this collection, I'm gonna read a few poems throughout, but what stuck out to me was Kendrick's love of Black in snippets, in chorus, in any surprise meeting. Even when she's traveling the world, for instance, when she's in Barcelona, she's visiting, she's at a concert, the band emerges. And instead of being struck by the music, she's struck by the Black magic of one among the other talents. I'll read you a piece of that poem in part. It says, and when the entire ensemble came on stage, 3 other guitarists, one sang flamenco, a flautist and a drummer, why, the last man was Black. And when he pushed those bongos into the Spanish blues, the music rose, found debris on the moon, cleaned it up, tossed it into the fire of the night, and made stars of the ashes. This Black man sitting on his wooden drum, white heat in his fingers, a memory for collusions, for the secret heritage, keeping the faith as only he could, walking into sound, coming out burning. As the second poet laureate of Chocolate City, it should really surprise no one that Kendrick's life and work were centered on the African-American experience. And as a lifelong educator and traveler, she worked to mother words, to usher in others, and carry her folks wherever she landed. As she flits about various cities, Kendrick keeps bringing Black back. Let me just read a little snippet of another poem here. She's in Paris, and what stops her is Black, the gray-haired woman, slow and definite, her step to the curb as sure as the arch of her small back, the gift of her smile, her legs yawning through traffic. And then 2 Black men strolling by, recognizing, entering, honoring a few words, a few gestures, a few handshakes, one wearing a blue face, too Black to be Black, only the strength of unmixed blue can hold it. The other, cape thrown about his shoulders, cavalier style, kissing hands as he moves toward the door. And Baldwin there, hoping for a taxi in the crowds. Here, she's much like Marshall, painting the men and women as part of the landscape, thinking of hue, the blackest blue. Kendrick shines a light on the collage of us lying in these bustling cities, on corners through the wide world, a thread of Black here and there. She refuses not to see what most let fade into the background. The ordinary working men and women, the head nods, the regal gray-headedness, as Kendrick puts it in the book's titular poem. It's a celebration of tender, stricken, unfamiliar things. In all her searching, whether she's near violence or in quiet introspection, God enters often, as do holy places and restorations. In one poem, she's in Paris going to worship with a friend, and she says, "We became friends leaning through the ribs of our common heritage." Their closeness is linked to the Blackness of their skin, not language, not place, not even spirit, but Blackness makes the pilgrimage holy. Blackness carries and binds them. In her chapbook, Through the Ceiling, she asked the question, what is a resurrection? Now, I'd argue that for poets, it's elegy and persona, it's empathy, it's carrying someone else's pain in your heart and letting it speak. You know, years ago, I came to Kendrick, like many others, via that masterwork that Van just showed us a clip from, The Women of Plums. And she invokes the voices of slave women. It's based on their narratives. The women are wailing. They're longing to be left to the water rather than find what awaits them on shore. They scrape up bits of bones. They sing to their children. They teach them to count and spell under cover of night. They spite men. They've lost plenty, hearing or spirit or sight. But Kendrick is a woman who salvages things. She turns to legacy and mothering almost as often as Black in this book. Most times it seems she is, as she puts it, longing for myself in the home of myself. Kendrick doesn't say that all of our living is pretty. She wants to illuminate us as our full human selves. She said at a reading for the National Book Festival there in DC in 2011, there has to be a moment when the poet and the reader are one. The poet must be a mirror and guide, and the reader must slip into the skin, see themselves in the same crafted light. In that same video, she told a story about being with James Baldwin, her bestie, as Ethelbert pointed out, for an event where they thought they were like the only two Black people in all of New Hampshire. And while they were at dinner, a man came to their table from the kitchen. He had his chef's hat on, and he had a stack of Baldwin's books. And he said, "Sir, will you autograph these books for me? I'm the cook, but I read." And Kendrick told Jimmy, as she called him, of course, not as I could call Baldwin. She said, "You can get every award in the world, but it'll never touch that." She wanted connection with down-home folks. She thought it necessary, imperative that the poet must give the poem up to any and every earnest reader, to their interpretation, to their ideas of beauty, their flowering need. I think for us, this is a lesson in humility. You know, in an interview with Kerry James Marshall, that artist that I mentioned at the beginning, he's asked about an abstract painting of his where a whole room is configured in barely visible shades of different Blacks. He says, it's the forcing the issue of perception by rendering an image that's just at the edge of it, which in some way forces you to look more closely, for you to adjust your vision so you can see in the dark. And he's speaking literally here, but as I'm a poet sitting with the work of other poets constantly, I hear that figuratively. How do we see into the dark? Meaning, who's helped us peer into the interior lives of Black folks, and further asked us by noticing theirs to peer into our own Black lives. Dolores Kendrick did this, and her work, her devotion to true Black and memory is a wide berth, a bridge in and around history. I just want to share, since we're thinking about visual artists, this lovely painting of Dolores Kendrick that Ethelbert mentioned. It's the painting that's hanging at Exeter, you know, this contrast to Kerry James Marshall here. And just to end, you know, it makes me think about, what did Dolores Kendrick pass on to us? She built us a Black house with Black wounds, Black wings, Black dreaming. None of us in her work are in shadow, but we're painted in careful relief, raised and given full range. And in the end, she beckons to us all. Tell me your trouble, tell me your sin, just call me woman. I'm your next of kin. Thank you.
Thank you, Remica. Thank you very much. You know, following that, you can only follow that with joy. So, Sister Joy, you're our next presenter. Unmute. You unmute, sister.
My apologies.
All right.
Okay. Yes, to follow such an eloquent presentation, thank you very much. Each of you who has presented before me. One of the things that made Dolores Kendrick so very special to me was her connection to the lay person, the everyday person, the person who could see the beauty, but may not be as poetic as some, but had aspirations to capture moments to share with others. And that's where I find myself. I'm Sister Joy. I'm honored to be an alum of the inaugural Poets in Progress reading series, which was established by Dolores in 2000. And it was in support of new and developing unpublished poets in Washington, D.C. She had an incredible following of, once you connected with Dolores, she saw to it that you were cared for with opportunities, with resources. Well, I'm one of the countless poets who was supported and mentored by Dolores over those many years during which she served as Poet Laureate of Washington, D.C. This, of course, was not a formal written mentorship agreement, but rather a professional literary connection born of mutual desire to serve and to ensure a level of excellence for poetry and the poetry community that we all served. And of course, that was what Dolores was about. She was about service, despite the fact that she was the grand diva of them all. She was about service, and that complexity is what made her so absolutely wonderful. Now, Dolores was extremely supportive of me, but also of my poetry group, Collective Voices. And over the years, she opened many doors to the group. As a matter of fact, in 2002, through the Office of the Poet Laureate, Dolores Kendrick awarded the Poet Laureate Special Award to me as director and founder of Collective Voices. And as I read the plaque that's on my wall to this day, for outstanding contributions to the art of poetry in Washington, D.C. I forever am honored by that gift and acknowledgement. Now, her support was just that tangible. Her support was real. With my connection with Dolores began actually when she was first appointed Poet Laureate. I was at the time serving as poetry editor for a literary quarterly, Ace Dialogue magazine. And one of my earliest assignments was to interview the newly appointed Poet Laureate of Washington, D.C. That was back in 1999. And to say that I was intimidated at the prospect was the understatement of the decade. But of course, by the time I left her office that day, I knew she would be great for the city, my hometown, and great for poetry and poets seeking to lift a literary voice, especially on issues of social relevance. I'm blessed to say that ours was a connection of mutual respect and admiration that grew stronger through the years. Of course, Dolores' scope was so much broader than poetry. She was passionate about the arts, all the disciplines, and hers was a voice that would resonate within the soul of any conscious spirit, crossing all artistic boundaries. Her programs and those she supported included not only poetry, but music and visual art, dance, sculpture, all, just more. So I often reflect on that today as I plan and structure my programs as Poet Laureate of Prince George's County. This is something that I witnessed the merit and the beauty of such programs presented by my mentor and friend, Dolores Kendrick. whether I'm in the process of speaking with teens or working with elders or just providing opportunities for the voice of the community to be heard through poetry. I know that it was Dolores Kendrick that laid that foundation in my spirit, that one of service and reaching out to all segments of the community, all demographics. One of my eternal goals is to build bridges, excuse me. And so that's between generations and between cultures and between the haves and the have-nots. So much of what needs to happen can happen in our society through poetry. And that's something that Dolores Kendrick taught me. And so I'm ever thankful for the trails that she blazed and the templates and the guideposts that she set, that many of us poets and literary leaders today continue to follow. Now, if ever there was a thank you or debt due, it would be to Dolores Kendrick for the light she lit and the fight she fought, inspiring, encouraging, and empowering so many with opportunities given to poets and would-be poets who were lifted by her tenacious yet reassuring generosity. Dolores Kendrick's complexity was a significant part of her persona, which captivated many poets and aspiring poets. I know because I was one of those poets. She wielded words deftly, and the world of poetry was the better for it. She welcomed all who were serious about their poetry, or frankly, whichever genre of art brought their creative voice to power. Her vocal command, as we heard in the video clip earlier, was as powerful as her wordsmanship. Both were extraordinary. Her lilting voice and of measured cadence, pace, and meter, evoking at times exquisitely delicate resonance, yet capable of devolving into a commanding, thoroughly haunting, unsettling timbre, was nothing short of masterful. The way she bent her voice around sound and pierced our souls with nuanced revelation was mesmerizing. The way she created poetry spaces and invited listeners and poets and non-poets alike to peel away life's distractions that prevented creation or appreciation of poetry. That was her way of ensuring poetry remained vital and vibrant in a world that often forgot that the heart is always central to life and to poetry. It was her gift to the world, a gift that, like her, was both exquisite and audacious. Her poetry was so incredibly beautiful, bringing us to tears, at times equally in ecstasy and heartbreak. How many times I cried upon hearing her poignant slave narratives, particularly as one that was heard earlier, Hattie on the Block. I would not dare try to recite that poem or read it, but I will stop here, and because there is no better way to pay tribute to a poet than share their poetry, I will share a few of her pieces, but not Hattie on the Block. Not Hattie on the Block. The one that I will share here is She Thought of Her Lost Life. And this is from Rainbow on Fire, Traveling. No, child, I tell you, we Black women must be careful. Not too much out here for us, you know. Give me your hand. There. We're bound together, you and me. Mother and daughter. Sometimes I believe I come out of the sea, the big ocean, while the waves were yelping and the sky screaming, and I give me a birth, you know, from water. Wasn't no man involved. Didn't need one. Only me. And that yelping sea, bringing forth from an opening in the sky in pain. You see, child, we Black women must be careful, because I think sometimes we defy nature. And when we do that, we have to be punished. Dolores Kendrick, she was incredible. One of the other pieces that I'd like to share is from her book, The Women of Plums. And this is titled, A Slightly Colored Lady. I was birthed in bondage, lived in Virginia. My ma was a slave, my pa a white man. Guess I'm about 90 years old, I guess. In slavery, you had to be good or you'd make massa mad and he'd sell you or beat you or both. If you were good and happy and knew how to sing a little, you'd be a pleasure for your mistress or master, and they'd keep you well. You'd eat well, chicken and corn and pork and beef and lamb, vegetables, fruits, figs, butter and milk. And you wouldn't hear them screams of other slaves who'd be caught and beat in the night. And you wouldn't hear their souls going to glory. And you wouldn't know till it was too late about Jonah, who'd be sold away from his family, and Lily Mae, who stood on the auction block, or one of them certain days get sold away from her children, and how she screamed and kicked to her nosebleed. You wouldn't know about that till it was too late. And anyways, knowing don't bring the dogs home, don't make the moon rise quicker. And I was happy, dying happy, happier more than the day I married, with my white dress trimmed in pink ribbon, with my Jesse on my arm. He was a teacher. Later, he teach me to read. He a good man, never a slave. I used to be brighter in color than I is now, 3-4 shades whiter, almost white as that wedding gown, because my mother was nearly white, white as sorrow, wrapped round a cloud, white as the wind dancing in a shroud, white as summer, white as death, white as the moon rising in her throat, white as words trembling as she spoke. Yes, nearly white. Here lately, I'm becoming dark like ginger cake. And I wonder if the Lord don't think it's time for me to go long somewhere else, where maybe colors be as you let them and can't bring no misery. That, to me, is absolutely Dolores Kendrick. And I'll close with Traveling from Peggy and Killing, also from the Women of Plums. They done found me. Lord, they done found me again. I'm dead and they don't know it. Sometimes I don't either. Except the spirit come creeping in my body like hot fire, and I burn and burn all inside, turn to dust, blow away out over their heads when they finds me crying in a sack. I listens and listens. I'm traveling in my bones, and the spirit swooshes out before I gets a chance to say amen. Oh, the wind, the sea, I'm dead on this boat. Go away, nigga, they says. So I goes, don't touch me yet. Got to get home to my mother. Ain't that what the Lord say when he rise from the dead? Going home to his mother. Won't somebody row this boat out of hell?
Thank you, Sister Joy. Was speechless. I want to thank all the panelists. I want at this moment thank everyone who's listening to our program, and also mention that IPPH has created a podcast with the help of Monique Gamble, D.C. Poet Laureate, and the Power of Poetry is a special podcast she's put together highlighting the work of Dolores Kendrick. And I think that link will be posted either in the chat room or attached to this Facebook link. So I wanted to do that. I wanted to go back and say a few things, beginning with what Abdul began with in terms of talking about poets that were overlooked, and he made reference to the Howard poets. I started publishing the work of Dolores Kendrick in 1974. And that's very important because if you even look at the book I made reference to, Kevin Young's new book on African-American poetry, 250 years, if you look at where Dolores Kendrick is placed, you realize she's placed in the wrong spot in that book. It seems that, for example, if you look at even to this evening, with what Abdul started out talking about, it's very important because Dolores Kendrick is linked to a period before the Black Arts Movement. Okay, we sort of rediscovered her after the Women of Plums and books like that. But I think because of what we're doing today, and this is, I guess, with IPPH, you begin try to document history, and especially literary history. One of the questions I'm going to ask everyone is how should we teach Dolores Kendrick? You know, where should we place her? If we're in a classroom, whose work should we introduce her with? When I think of Dolores Kendrick, I think of the person who was the person that you always talked about because they were like sisters, and that was Mae Miller Sullivan, okay, the daughter of Kelly Miller in terms of educator. You made reference, I think Van made reference to her book. What I have here is Dolores Kendrick. This is Through the Ceiling. This is her chapbook, which is part of the Paul Bremen series of books that Paul Bremen, a fantastic person in England, he was publishing all these books by African-American writers. So if we took this as a guide and look at the other books that Paul Bremen published, okay, this book here, Dolores Kendrick, this was the 24th book he did in the series, okay? So if you want to say, okay, who were the other people he did before Dolores Kendrick, these would be her peers or people that maybe she should be studied with. Robert Hayden, Anna Bontemps, Conrad Kent Rivers, Mary Evans, Russell Atkins, Audre Lorde, Dudley Randall, Owen Dodson. Okay. You see this list, it's very interesting. It's not Haki Madhubuti, Nikki Giovanni. And so what happens is that once we put this in, getting back to what Abdul was saying, it becomes very important in terms of how we place her and how we look at her. The second thing I want to introduce before I ask you all to respond, we talk about Dolores Kendrick and voices, okay? One of the books that's interesting is this book, Soul Talk, by the critic Akasha Gloria Hall. I think she's in isolation or in exile in Arkansas right now. I'm just joking. But what happens, this is a book entitled The New Spirituality, it's Soul Talk, The New Spirituality of African-American Women. And in here, she's talking about maybe like Sister Joy Remica, I think I used to, like, okay, you write because these voices come to you, like Alice Walker's talking about, yeah, I heard these voices, you know, Tony Caven-Barra. I've always stayed away from those type. I never dated those type of women, you know, who had the voices. Anyway, I want to read this and open this up for comment. Gloria Hall, Akasha Gloria Hall she interviewed Dolores Kendrick, and this is what Dolores Kendrick says about what the poems that Sister Joy just got finished reading. Dolores says, "We know very little about the creative process. This experience has taught me that. I've always believed that as an artist, I'm a vehicle through which the creative energy flows, and that links me with God. I thoroughly believe this. I don't believe I originate anything. I think God originates it, and he in his wisdom has given tons of people on this planet certain talent through which they can bring their art to the surface. I think I saw that manifested very, very strongly in this particular work, and I don't understand it. I'm not going to try to understand it. I'm just going to try to accept it because I think that there's a level of creativity that people hit that we know very little about." So that's my first question. How many of you might be in agreement in that? I mean, in your own work, do you have the voices that come to you? Are you on a certain spiritual path? So I'll just open it as the first question.
Well, I'll respond. One of the things that has happened on occasion, and it's certainly not always, but there have been times where I perceive that there is a visitation. Um, when I wrote a particular poem about slave ship victors, not victims, and about the bondage transatlantic experience, I literally wrote that through tears. And I couldn't even see the keys. I just had to keep going forward. That type of experience, I truly felt as though I were a vessel. And I'm just trying to be obedient and conveying what is given me. That not always through tears, but there have been messages that I feel are not of me. And I feel blessed when that happens because it doesn't happen often, but it is something that is a transportive experience.
Anybody else want to comment? Remica?
I can't say I'm of the Sister Joy or Kendrick or even Lucille Clifton, like messages from the ones kind of where I'm given things, but certainly like writing for me, it comes like a lightning strike, like so quickly when I'm writing my own poems, it's kind of one of those drop everything moments. I don't think it's God speaking, but I certainly believe very deeply in an inner spirituality that kind of leads us to certain places. And certainly sometimes I think I'm led to something in the research, or there's some kind of like pinpointed, flash that forces me to write a poem in a certain way or in the voice of someone else. So certainly when I'm reading Kendrick, I feel like, persona for her, she was, walking in the shoes of those folks, right? Like in their actual, but beings in some way. And so I'm always trying to get as close to that as possible in my own work.
Ben or Abdul?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it, Alphabet. Because I feel like there are two questions almost. One about like how would you teach the work or place the work, and then the kind of influence that it might have, or process of writing the work, how that might in some way resonate with what she was doing, and in a way I kind of can answer it in this both parts of that in the same way, in that I see an extension of tradition happening with Dolores Kendrick, in that there's a lot of emphasis put on confessionalism, both during that period, and we see a lot of it happening today with a lot of writers. But the work, that kind of work of trying to capture the voice of people around you, people that you grew up, the voices you grew up listening to, the voices that you feel are coursing through you, their blood that's coursing through you, is something that she was a part of. And when I see people, writing, I think of course, I think of Sterling Brown, but I also think of someone like Muriel Rukeyser, being in that same vein. And if I were going to be like thinking about how to teach that, I mean, now people talk about docupoetics and that kind of work that's done, and I feel like all the folks who are doing that work today, and I include myself, include people like Honore Jeffers, Tahima Jess, all those folks who are doing that work are in many ways, Remica, in many ways, we're extending that tradition that Dolores Kendrick was extending in her time, right? But also, when I think about that process, it is a process that, like Sister Joy was saying, for me, I do think about those voices giving me permission, to use their voice, their language, their stories. And I'm a praying man, so I approach my writing day in that way, with prayer, hoping that is that I can have that gift as I sit down to do the work.
So that explains why you received all these awards, because you're a praying man.
Yeah.
Abdul, did you want to comment here?
Yeah, I guess I'll do the two-part approach like Van. I think that it's important to teach Kendrick alongside Hayden, particularly in the context of that singular voice and not wanting to sort of just, follow a school. I think that, Dolores talked a lot about that, following your own vision and not, feeling like you have to kind of go with the pack. And then also, I think Gwendolyn Brooks, I think that's a big influence. You can hear the music throughout all of her verse, and then the portraiture, that we see both in Brooks and Kendrick. And as for the voices, I think I like what Sister Joy said about how, the lightning doesn't hit often, but, when it does, it does. But I would say, like, in those moments where I had insomnia, I did feel like I was writing in a different space. It wasn't, the everyday Abdul. It was kind of like I'm tapping into a subconscious that I'm normally not in touch with, and I'm able to see different kinds of images, different signs and reference points, and different music. Yeah.
Well, for the record, I just say I love the everyday Abdul, just so that you know. I want to come back, Sister Joy. I want to ask you this next question, because it's one that, it's a sensitive question. It's controversial. Dolores Kendrick was Poet Laureate for 18 years. And so my question to you, could you see yourself being Poet Laureate for 18 years? And also, how does being a Poet Laureate affect your own writing? And also, whether you think a Poet Laureate should have, the position should have a term limit?
For me, I cannot see me being Poet Laureate for 18 years. No, I'm rounding out my third and scheduled final year. This is year 3 for me for a 3-year term. So I'm the concept of 18 years or 10 years, it's beyond me. It really is, because what I've had to do is to put so many of my personal agenda items on pause. When I accepted the appointment, I did so knowing that I could not do both. Just as I took an early retirement from my 9 to 5, all those 10, 12 years ago, to pursue poetry full time, I then accepted that I would take a pause from my personal literary ambitions to accept this position as Poet Laureate. I had some ideas in mind, but frankly speaking, the things that have blossomed during this 3-year term far exceed what I had envisioned taking on. I'm working harder now than I ever did. But I'm okay with that. I believe in service. And so what I'm attempting to do most, and this is what I got from Dolores, is to serve as broadly as possible with quality, not just quantity. We can certainly have program after program, activity after activity, but if there is not growth, if there's not development of the literary community for all, then I think we're missing the mark. So much of what needs to happen, and I admit this is subjective. They put me here, so I have to make the call. So, but so much of what needs to happen can happen only with the support of various components of the community. It is not strictly the Arts Council that makes it happen. It is not just the poets that make it happen. And this is why you have to find ways to galvanize and connect various aspects of the community. Folks who never envisioned going to a poetry reading or picking up a pen to write a poem do have a vested interest in the benefits of a thriving poetry community. They don't know that. That's where we come in to try to convey that through experiential learning. So.
During this evening, a number of you made comments about having late night phone calls with Dolores Kendrick. And I was wondering how many of you have actual correspondence letters, in the case of Sister Joy, whether you saved the flyers that you participated with in terms of from Dolores Kendrick, just the actual documentation. I know because of technology, we're quick to send a text or pick up a phone, and we're not going back and writing those long letters, but I was just wondering whether any of you have letters from Dolores Kendrick.
I do. And one of the things that I have that I cherish is an actual, there was an occasion for her to provide a letter for our poetry extravaganza that we did for 20 years, Collective Voices, presented to Washington, D.C. for 20 years. And 1 year, Dolores was not in a position to provide the written letter. And so she dictated the letter to me. And I have it saved as a MP4 file, and it's in her voice, and I cherish it. And that, along with the various letters and flyers and programs, I think I have a couple that I actually asked her to sign years ago. But of course, as the years went by, you didn't want to pester her with that. But she was always so gracious, and yeah, but I do.
Right. One of the other things I think that is important for us to think about are the lessons that have nothing to do with poetry that we perhaps learn from Dolores Kendrick. Anybody want to comment on that? That has nothing to do with literature, getting published or craft or anything, but lessons. I'll give you an example. It's like, one thing I found out about Dolores Kendrick, if you were on the wrong side of her, you paid the price, and also what she always insisted on, that poets get paid. That was one of the things, and that's a life lesson, especially, if you're a parent and stuff like that. Yeah, it's nice, but at the end of the day, there's tuition to be paid, or there's milk that's needed. And so I just wanted, that's one of the things she taught me. It had nothing to do with poetry. She just, like an old woman, this is what you need to do, Ethelbert. Get your taxes done early. But are there any lessons like that she conveyed to you?
I think her the pride that she took in teaching was a good lesson, because I think a lot of poets complain a lot about, and I'm guilty of it myself, of having teaching gigs and the work you have to do. But she seemed incredibly proud of that work and would talk about it with a kind of pride. And it made me think, like, well, I look back in time and think about, what I often refer to as the day job in the same way, because what you're doing is that you're kind of building readers, and so few people know how to read poetry, and so that is it's a great service to be able to teach someone how to read a poem, and I think about that, quite a bit, like, just what that means, because she was, she, like you said, she was teaching at Exeter, and I really value teaching in high schools. When I had that opportunity, I go to Oak Park, River Forest High School every year for the past 12 years, doing a program there with them. And I just love teaching my undergrads, as opposed to the graduate students in my MFA program. It's a very different kind of mission. Meeting someone for the first time who has no interest in poetry, knows nothing about poetry, but you can turn them on to something that they didn't think they would like.
Any other comments? Are there any questions being placed in the? Abdul, you want to go ahead?
Oh, I would say that there were a couple of things I remember she said, like, she was very suspicious of like schools and like MFA programs, and so I remember when I told her I planned to get one, she was kind of like, well, why would you do that? And I felt really silly, and she said, you got to be very suspicious of these places like Iowa, like she was very critical of schools. But I also remember her telling me, like, this thing called poetry, you need to get out of the way, like sometimes we get in the way of poetry. And she had this very spiritual approach, I think, to writing poems and maybe even revising poems, you know, and I, you know, I know she carried a notebook with her wherever she went. If we were talking and she liked the sound or the music or the texture of a word, she'd write it down, and just being present in the way that she was just very inspiring, you know, to me. And then she would snap out of that poet phrase and like yell and throw a house slipper at the waiter, you know, for daring her to pick her own cup of tea, you know, or something like that. She was complex that way, you know.
We all are. As we come to the end of the program, are there any questions? Is Amy or Jack there to anybody posting anything? I don't see anything on my side. If not, I'd like to thank everybody. You know,
Thank you, Albert.
beginning with Mayor Pratt for the IPPH giving us a forum. Joy, who's joining the staff and helping out. Joy 1X. Okay, just so that, you know, these programs are made possible because there are people who are putting it together, getting in touch with people. And then also, I always feel that one of the beautiful things about being a writer is being a part of a community. And, you know, to see all of you together, you're all part of my life, and I'm deeply grateful that, you know, you were able to respond and participate. And remember Dolores Kendrick, you know.
Well, may I ask a question,
Sure.
Alphabet,
Mm-hmm.
as a closeout question, and then everybody I know has to get back to whatever else they're doing. But as poets, or as you study those who are poets, what do you think people grab hold of? What are they inspired by? Is it a thought, or is it an impulse, or is it that one is enraptured by words? What do you think it is, or
Well,
is it none of the above?
I would have someone like Ava and Jordan respond back to that, because he had the Magnolia with the spelling bee in the language and how it changes a person, you know. So I would begin with you. Not putting you on the spot, but
you are. But you know, I think, you know, when I think about poetry readings, and I talk about this a lot with with my students, you get to a certain point, you know, as a writer, and you don't have the luxury of a workshop. You don't have the luxury of going somewhere and having people read your work and give you feedback and things like that. And so often that workshop happens at a reading. You stand up with some new work and you read to people, and you know, based on how they respond, whether that poem is saying anything or not. And often what it is that you'll talk to people and they'll tell you things that rang true to them. And that's the thing that I try to stay conscious of. You know, I often tell my students that, you know, how it is in life is how it is in the poem. You know, because people always try to think of different ways and strategies and things. And sometimes it's just, you know, it's like Occam's razor. Like, it's like the simplest thing, you know, you know, that's true. So why aren't you trying to say that, you know? And so I think that's it for me, is just thinking of what's true, what rings true to people.
Remica?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. You know, Mayor Pratt, I would probably say it's all of the above. It just depends on the day, right? Like, because what I'm looking for in a poem might change on a day. You know, I was talking to my students about, I teach a class, Women Writing Black Lives Matter. So it's all these Black women poets that I'm bringing in. But the day Amanda Gorman stood up as the inaugural poet, we, you know, like the electricity that happened, like spanning from that moment. And what we came to was, sure, the words are important, and sure, the ideas are important, but in that moment, she was the poem, right? Like, her presence in that space, the way she met that moment and carried herself. And I think often, you know, that's what's happening. And sometimes it's just it's the emotion in the voice, and also like the way you craft empathy with beauty. You know, that's That's what I'm always looking for when I'm looking for a poet. And that's what I hear in the work of Dolores Kendrick, like all night long. You know, I'm doing, my little mute thing keeps popping up saying, you're muted. I know I'm muted. I'm just and at Dolores Kendrick, you know, as she's as she's going, right? Because it's about how beautifully she's able to craft something and make me feel someone else's experience in that moment.
Thank you, Mika. Sister Joy?
Yes, I'm making sure I'm not muted. Okay. So the reality for me has been that I get my greatest feedback, my strongest responses when I connect with people on that everyday level. I tend to be a salt of the earth kind of person, and I know it. I don't profess to be the greatest of anything except in my effort to connect with people. And that's when one of my recent poems that was published in an international anthology was a very simplistic poem about the pandemic, but it was about looking out a kitchen window, something that people can everyday experience, but it touched so many people. And I wasn't surprised when of all the poems that I submitted for various publications, that one was readily picked. But when we connect with people where they are, that allows them to see themselves, whether it be in poetry or in film or even in dance, connecting in a way that allows the person to be present in the experience.
Abdul?
Mayor Pratt, I have to admit that what draws me to poems are the poems where I think after you read it, you're thinking about it, but it connects the head and the heart, right? You're having this situation where you're thinking about the meaning, but your heart is telling you exactly, you know, how you should feel. And there's this back and forth thing. I think I'm gonna misquote Miles Davis, and I'm not gonna do it, but there was like, no, I'm not gonna do it. But that for me draws me to the poem. Like when after the poem is read, I'm still thinking about it, you know, and I'm still affected by it. Kind of like seeing a good movie, you know, where the characters are still traveling with you and you're wondering, oh my gosh, I wonder what happened to that kid, or, you know, that kind of thing. So that's the kind of poetry that I get drawn to, that enraptures me.
I'm cutting off talking about poetry. I'm cutting off a person who's in Iran right now, who's trying to contact me on Skype, and so I'm worried about her as a translator and a poet. But that's sort of my answer in terms of one. I try to use this journey that I'm on as a poet to connect with people, to build bridges. And these are serious times. Like this woman who's trying to contact me now. I didn't know she was still alive because she's very political and she's in Iran. And, you know, we're here as poets. And after January 6th, you know, there's certain things we can't take for granted. And so, you know, when we look ahead, you know, this is hopefully when we draw upon Kendricks and Baldwin and other writers, we want to maintain our vision. We want to maintain our hope. When I introduced this program, I was making reference to Dolores Kendrick and light. You know, the same way when we talk about Lucille Clifton, we remember the light. And that is very important because we've come through dark times, and after this weekend is over, the dark times might be coming back again. You know, like I tell people, there's always a sequel to everything except Catwoman with Halle Berry. But maybe Donald Trump will push that aside. I don't know. But you know, it's a Calvin Coolidge story. But what happens is that there's a need for poets. And there's a need for us to find time not just to do our poetry, but like Dolores Kendrick, to teach. And to teach with passion, to teach with concern, and to teach with love. So I want to thank everyone in terms of this program. You made it possible. And I hope that, you know, you stay safe and continue doing what you do. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. It was just a wonderful evening, just very rich. So we're very, very grateful.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ethelbert.
Okay, thank you,
so
Jody.
much.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay,
Mayor.
take care.
Thank you,
Thank
Ethelbert.
you.
Thank you,
All
Mayor.
All right.
Thanks, Jody.
Okay.
All right.
Welcome.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.